Oh, it's saying you can't turn your phone while recording. Oh.
It is showing me sideways.
Okay. Well, we'll rotate it then. Just a second.
Did you shut it off?
I didn't. It says live, is it not?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay. And there you are.
Okay, hello, welcome. I'm trying to see if we've got any people who have joined here, but I'll give a few minutes before we really get started with our live presentation. No.
23 viewers.
23 viewers we're getting, so I'm going to just give a little bit longer before we get started with the presentation, and then we'll get rolling with this Facebook Live. All right, so welcome to the Virtual Quilt Show Facebook Live. My name is Jamie David, and I am with BERNINA of America. I'm going to do a presentation today for you on our machine, the L460. I'm pretty excited to share this with you. This is an overlocker machine. Just to clarify, an overlocker, a serger, same machine, different name. If you're in North America, you're probably more used to hearing the name serger for this machine. But it's like, it has a lot of really great quilt applications. So that's the other thing. You may be sitting here like, I'm at a virtual quilt show and I'm a quilter and I don't really know how I would use a serger or an overlocker in the practice that I have. So I'm going to show you a little bit of things on the machine that I like to do for quilting, as well as just some of the features of the machine. So let's go ahead and dive into that. Like I said, it's not a sewing machine, but it's kind of closely related. Instead of having a bobbin, there are loopers in this machine, and basically it trims the edge of the fabric while finishing the edges with thread while you're sewing. The unique thing about the 460 from BERNINA is it's our only overlocker that we currently have in our line that has a DC motor. The DC motor is the same motor that you're used to having in your BERNINA sewing machine. So what that means for you is that this machine is strong, has a powerful penetration power, but also gives you that stitch-by-stitch control. So this is an overlocker that feels a lot more like your sewing machine. In addition to that, it comes with the BERNINA foot control. So the needle up-down function on the kickback of that foot control is available with this machine, comes with it. It also has the same power supply, so those parts are interchangeable with your BERNINA sewing machine, which is a nice kind of built-in feature. So it also has these bright LED lights. These shine right into the looper area of the machine, so it makes it really easy to thread. I promise you, it really is easy to thread. I know they have a reputation for being kind of hard, but if I were to open this up, you'd see it's nice and bright, it's very open, it's easy to see the thread path. It doesn't take long at all to learn how to do that part. It also has an extension table, so this can come off here, but you have a nice, great working surface out here, especially for things like quilting where you're doing a little bit of piecing and stuff like that. And you probably will recognize this accessory. This is the freehand system. So if you have a BERNINA sewing machine, you are used to having a freehand system on your sewing machine, and it's really great that we now have this feature on our overlocker as well. So it's perfect for doing things like chain piecing that you would be doing in your quilt piecing. So let's go ahead and get started with some piecing. So I just prepped here a couple of fabric squares to do a basic 4 patch. And I've just got my fabrics right sides together. I already have the machine set up for what is called a 3-thread overlock. I'm using the right needle on this machine, and I can set my cutting width to the perfect 1/4 inch seam. Another really cool thing that comes standard with this overlocker is the seam guide, and this just attaches right here on the stitch plate, and you can close your table here around that, and then you can set that to have your perfect 1/4 inch seam. So I've pretty much got mine set up where I know I have a 1/4 inch seam I like for the right needle 3-thread overlock, and I'm just going to put my fabric through here. I can tip the toe of the presser foot right here to put my fabric under, or remember I have the freehand system that I can use to set my fabric in. And I'll just sew that. And it's just barely skimming the edge of the fabric. I also have this cutoffs bin over here that's going to be collecting all of the fabric cutoffs and like thread scraps that will come off the machine. Alright, so I have now my 3-thread overlock here, and I can go ahead and just check that. Like if I were setting this up, I could check to see if I'm getting a 1/4 inch seam, and I'll just hold this up here where you all can kind of see that I am getting, in fact, a nice 1/4 inch seam. I've done a contrast thread color here so you can see it a little bit easier, but you can do your standard quilting thread, like your neutral colors, your grays, your white. And in fact, the overlocker takes, well, it uses a lot more thread. You can use whatever thread on this that you want. I'm using Cerakote, which is by Mettler. It's a polyester thread. It's great on the overlockers because it's strong. And it comes in these large spools. So the machine uses more thread, so you likely want to have the larger spools if you're going to be using it often. So I just recommend when you're getting started, it's great to buy neutrals. So your grays, your like beige, eggshell, those kind of things that can blend with a lot of different things, so you have more availability with what you can do with them. So I'm just going to keep going here with my quilt piece. I'm going to open up and kind of finger press my seams to one side, and then I can just nest these together. I'm not really worried about my thread tails just yet. The machine will trim off anything that comes to this side where the cutting knife is. So I'm going to go ahead and put that back through here. So keep in mind, if you are trimming off any like width of fabric is falling into your cutoff bin here, anything that comes in here plus what's left over here is what is technically your seam allowance. So if you're trimming off like a 1/4 inch and it ends up here, you're not truly getting a 1/4 inch seam. So you really want to just be skimming that edge, which is why this guide is really helpful when you're doing quilt piecing. But the nice thing about using an overlocker for quilt piecing is that the seams on the inside of your quilt top are all finished off nice and neat with the looper threads of the machine. So everything in here is going to stay together, it's not going to fray apart, and it's going to give you kind of a nice solid quilt top and some longevity to that. Piecing on an overlocker really works great for anything that's linear. So stuff like this, your squares, your 4-patch blocks, your 9-patch, anything like that, your rail fence patterns, strips of any pattern that calls for like a strip piecing kind of application. Also log cabin is another great quilt block to do on an overlocker. It's not a precision machine, so you're not going to be able to do like a lot of specific angles and precise piecing, like that stuff that you might do if you were doing paper piecing. So just keep that in mind. But if you're doing just general piecing, this really is nice, saves a lot of time, and gives you a nice finish. So now I'm just going to take this and I'm going to put it on a piece of batting with some backing fabric. So it's very small what I'm doing here, but you kind of get the idea. I was going to say too, like if you take your quilt top to a long armor, you might want to like finish the edges with the 3-thread overlock as well, and then those edges won't fray away. So that's going to be a nice application too, as you can finish the edge of a quilt top that you've made, and then you can take it to your long armor, they can put it on the frame and not have to worry about the edges of that top fraying out. So I'm just going to take the seam guide off, and I'm going to use the markings on my presser foot here in that same exact stitch, and I'm just going to attach all of these layers together. So that's another great thing, is that it goes through thick things, thin things. It's really very, very easy, and you have presser foot pressure too that you can adjust. So I'm just going to go around all 4 sides, trimming as I go here. And it does shift a little bit. Like if I was doing this for a more realistic application, I would probably spray baste this or somehow kind of baste that, just so the fabric stays there a little bit better for me. But it really is doing a nice job, actually. Trim my thread tails here just straight into my cut-offs bin, so it's nice to have everything collected in one place, and then you can empty it straight into your trash can versus this stuff just kind of falling to the floor. But I've got my little quilt sandwich here now ready to go. And another thing that I like to use the overlocker for is just straight up attaching binding. So you do this method in a similar method as you would with your sewing machine. I am going to go ahead and just increase my cutting width on this a little bit so that it will cover the stitch that I just made here, and I won't see that thread underneath the binding when I put it on. And one other thing that I'm going to do that's kind of cool is add this fusible thread into my lower looper. So this is basically going to make my binding application more of like a basting application, because I'm going to have to come back and sew it because the fusible will melt away, and then my stitch is not really so much there anymore. It's a temporary hold more than anything. So I'm going to go ahead and put this on my lower looper, and I'm just going to trim my thread straight back here at the spool, and I'm going to tie these together and just pull this through the machine. So this is a quick way if you wanted to change thread or change thread color, that you don't have to stop and totally re-thread the machine. But I do promise, super easy to thread, so don't worry about that part either. I'm going to just trim this so it pulls through a little easier. I did raise my presser foot. When I do that, my tensions go down to 0, so everything's basically open and I can just pull through without pulling through tension discs. And I see my fusible thread has come out here, so I'll trim that and just lower this, and I'm just going to do a chain off. So also on the overlocker, you're sewing, don't always have to have fabric underneath the needles when you're sewing. You're often making a chain. All right, so that's looking good there. And I have some binding here, and I'm going to just kind of show you as best I can on here with this camera angle. You can kind of see what I'm doing. I'm going to just put the binding on the top of my quilt. So I've tucked over the end where I'm starting here, and it's just a kind of a fast application of tucking the tails together. So I'm going to leave some space here out from my corner, and then I'm just going to line this up with my cutting knife so that I've got a little bit of a tail back here when I come back around. And what I want to do is I want to sew up just to about 1/4 inch from the edge. And remember, I've got stitch by stitch sewing because of my DC motor. I can sew really slow, so I can kind of just eyeball that. And then I'm going to chain off, and then I'll fold my miter and then go down the opposite or the adjacent side. So you want to leave that 1/4 inch space so that you can fold your miter when you go to turn this over to the back and stitch it down. So I'm going to start sewing here. I do need to adjust slightly for this thread because it's a lot stretchier. So I'm going to just change my tensions around a little bit here so that so that I can see that I'm getting good coverage on the back side with that stretchy thread. And I'm also going to make my stitch length a little bit shorter so I get more of that thread back there for the gluing aspect. Alright, so now it's going to go slower because it's shorter, but I can stop pretty much exactly where I want, use my freehand system here and just chain off. Alright, and now I'm ready to fold my miter just like I would if I was using a sewing machine. So I folded my miter at my corner, and then I'm just going to take that and put it right in front of my knife, right at the edge of it, and start down the next side. Alright, stopping again about a 1/4 inch from that edge. Just chaining off. Fold my next corner, same thing. The nice thing about this application, even if you're not using the fusible thread, is that you're going to get the seam finished. So normally with my quilting, I'll come back and hand stitch my binding down. So I do like having that overlocked edge because this stays nice and neat. It also is an even, consistent amount of material in the seam, so I get really like perfectly straight binding. I don't have a thick area, then a thin area, or anything like that. So now I'm coming back to the front. So what I need to do here is just kind of open this up and give my binding tail here a little trim so I can tuck it into this seam. So I'll open this, and it's a little awkward on this small piece here, being that I'm so close to the corner here, but it's not too bad. And I don't have to worry so much about this edge being a little uneven because my machine has the knife and it's going to trim that up nice and straight for me. You do need to watch this folded edge to just make sure it goes underneath the foot easily. And then I'll just veer off. And then with the corners, if this were a regular, like just if I was not using the fusible, you could trim that thread chain right here and you could tie that together for a little bit of securing in your corner. But quite honestly, like I usually just trim it just like this, and I haven't had anything come apart on me. I mean, it's not like I've backstitched or there's no real way to secure that corner when you're doing this method, unless you tie those together, those thread tails. But for me, it's not been a problem on anything I've made this way. So now I've got that fusible thread on the underside here, so I kind of have this shortcut, like I said, basting method where I can take this now and fold my binding to the back side and come along with an iron and just sort of press that. I have this little baby craft iron here, so I don't know what kind of actual melting action I'm going to get, but in theory that fusible thread will melt enough to hold your binding in place, and then you can take this straight over to your sewing machine, or if you had a cover stitch machine, that's another option, but you could just stitch this binding straight through all the layers, and it's basically basted in place with that glue that's underneath there. It's kind of catching, but you get the idea. So I know it's a kind of an unconventional way of thinking about doing your quilts, but it certainly adds a level of speed, very tidy finishing, great for your linear quilts, quilt tops, like I said. a fast way to finish small projects with the binding here too. So I don't know, I think I probably did this way faster than I did when I practiced. So I think we probably got some time for questions. If anybody has any questions, I do have my husband here with me, so he can help me field questions if we've got some.
I think the only one that I've seen so far, but you may have actually answered it already just in your discussion, was somebody early on asked if you had the knife up.
Oh yes, you can't, and the cutting knife is really pretty easy on this machine. I don't know if you're able to see this. Can you see that, Trey? Or is it just blocked? But the knife on-off is just right in here on the machine. So if you were doing an application where you didn't want to be trimming the fabric, it is very important that you know where your fabric edge is, because if you don't, you can run it up here into your loopers and cause a problem. But if you use that seam guide, then you can keep control of your fabric edge and also know where your fabric's going in, and you can not be trimming. And a good application for that's when I made this pillow. This is ribbon. It's that Renaissance woven ribbon. It's something you don't want to cut, because if you cut, then your ribbon starts to fall apart. So I did flat lock, which is another stitch you can do on this to basically piece these pieces, and I did take my cutting knife down for that application, so I wasn't cutting my fabric. That's a great question. Anything else?
I think thus far we've just gotten a comment on your video quality being excellent.
Thank you, thank you. We try here. My husband does have a film background, so I do have some nice lights in my house right now, which is great. So it's a little added benefit of having a filmmaker around. But I would like to say, if you are interested in purchasing a 460, we have some great pricing on all of our machines right now, our overlockers in particular. This machine's regularly $16.99. We've got it on sale for $12.99. And you can buy that straight through the virtual Quilt Show website. You can put a deposit down, but it links you up with a dealer, your dealer. So you'll select that, they get the sale. We're just selling for all of our dealerships via this platform. It's kind of fun, and I really appreciate them inviting us to participate this way. It's a nice way to reach out to you guys. Yeah, I think that's about all I've got. Thanks for joining.